Welcome to the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting for the 26th of July. We've got a fairly reasonable agenda. Brett and Paul normally is tackling, so really just got we've got a presentation from Waka, and then we have our two submissions through, and then our submission summary. So here's hoping we're wrapped up by 12. That's the target. We'll look to take a break after we do item 6, which is the Indigenous Biodiversity submission. Right, so that's the plan. We've got apologies from Councillor Burko, McPherson, Remington, and apologies for lateness from Councillor Husband. Do I have a, sorry? Oh, was it cut? Dennis is online.
Just need to make sure we've got a 8 for him to start the meeting. And
Our quorum is still only 2.
still only 2? Okay, then we can start the meeting.
Nice.
Cunning of us.
All right. Okay, so do I have a mover for those apologies? Councillor Strange, a seconder, Councillor Kneebone. All those in favor? Aye, opposed? Carried. Disclosures of interest, any new disclosures of interest that are not already on the register, or disclosures of interest to items on the agenda today? Nope. Good. Confirmation of the minutes. We've got 2 submissions. Subcommittee. Oh, sorry. Right. Please for that. Gosh, I think I was now. Can I get a mover to confirm the agenda today? Councillor Nicol, and second Councillor Kneebone. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Done all of the. Sweet. Okay. We'll move on to item 4. This is on page. What page are we on? 5. This is the submission subcommittee minutes from the 1st of June. These minutes, there's just section A items, so they're really just for noting. Would somebody like to move those minutes? Councillor Nicol, Councillor Quayle, would you like to second? Oh, you weren't at that one. I'm happy to second that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Oh, and then our second minutes. Councillor Quayle moving, Councillor Nicol second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. So we'll welcome to Waka to the meeting today. We've got the new Chief Executive, Fiona Carrick. We also have the Chair, Hamish Bell, online. Welcome, Hamish. Welcome, Fiona. Fiona, I know that we have seen you virtually, but since this is your first time presenting to us in person, I might get you to just introduce yourself to the committee. That'd be awesome.
Just leave it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Tēnā koutou, everyone. It's really nice to be here in person versus on the screen. So as the chair has said, my name is Fiona Carrick. I have the privilege of leading Te Waka as the Chief Executive. And as a team, we're really focused on the activity and growth transformation that will advance economic development in our mighty Waikato region. My family and I have been based in Cambridge for the last 10 years. I have some very strong community connections. I am a trustee on the Waipa Community Facilities Trust. I also serve as a board member for Kiwifruit Vine Health, which is one of my passions, New Zealand's primary industry. And with all that experience, I bring a very deep and broad commercial understanding of what are our economic drivers and how our resources, our approach, and our execution of activity delivers value to the region. So that is me in a nutshell. If we're comfortable, I'll move on to the item at hand.
Great, thanks for that, Fiona. Appreciate it. I can recall learning about the Kiwi Vine Health organization during the regional pest management plan, hearing about wild kiwi fruit. The
Correct.
impact of that.
Mm.
That was a learning for me. I
Yeah.
hadn't come across that before. So counselors, we're on page 13, and this is just a follow-up to the workshop we had on the 15th of June with Hamish and Fiona. So so some of this, well, the majority of this should be familiar to everyone, but off you go, Fiona.
I will take the paper and content as read. If we could just go to the presentation with the Te Waka strategy on a page. Thank you. So the areas that Te Waka has focused on are listed in our full strategic PO. You will be aware that we have been focused on these areas for over a year now. In the June workshop, we discussed the key areas of focus and how we were prioritising. We took on board feedback from councillors and had some robust discussions since that time. Obviously, industry and business growth has seen a huge focus for us on workforce development. We continue on investment attraction and business attraction to the region. It is often slow burn, but there are a number of areas where we are connecting. Connections and partnerships is a key area that we've been focused on in the last 3 weeks, especially around our approach to regional engagement and how we partner with our regional partners and our district councils on their key strategic priorities. We are a small organisation, so it's as much about what we do focus on and where we do add value as where we can provide a connection elsewhere so there is optimal execution. Insights and advocacy, we've been privileged to have some very close interaction with the Waikato Regional Council data and analytics projects that's taking place. We've also been engaged with the Waikato Wellbeing Project, and myself and Rosie Sprague, who's our Industry and Sector Development Manager, have been utilising some of our inside analysts from our history to ensure that we are supporting informative insights that aren't just advocating our region as a great place to invest and work and live, but also will stand the test of time and are actually generating insights. We have a wealth of data. Economic development agencies across our motu do, and it's about what that is meaningful to our region, how we make it meaningful to our region. So in addition to the strategy on a page, if we can just go to our priorities from now until the end of the calendar year. Next slide. Thank you. I thought I'd just give you a quick update on some of the activities and areas of focus that we have delivered since the workshop, and that will continue to be a priority till the end of the calendar year. We have refreshed Te Waka's digital front door. It's very important that our website and digital presence is an advocate in itself, that it addresses many of our audiences, and it provides another channel and an efficient channel of optimal engagement. The Regional Business Partner Program is now with SODA. We are an active partner in supporting SODA with that program. We have, as I mentioned, a continued focus on workforce development. The Regional Skills Leadership Group report was released in early July, and our role is now to pick up some of the implementation pieces from that. We have done a lot of granular connections in road safety, training for truck drivers, cultivate trust. We're doing very active work there in terms of attracting tech talent to the region as a whole. And we have also engaged with Transport New Zealand with their Road to Success program. So these are all areas where we are looking to develop not just skills, but meet the need for skills in the region to support growth. Obviously, health is also an area that we would all like to support. Unfortunately, the Regional Skills Leadership Group has not had any health sector representation. Obviously, challenges around pandemic, wide-ranging reform, etc. That is still an area of focus, and we are willing and able to support that where we can. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we are actively working with the 11 district councils, and we have also taken up a lot of activity of our Freight Action Plan. It was a great platform where Waka worked with the industry, and it is very much an industry-led position, and it is actually driven by action. We have continued to engage with business, and you will see the outcomes of that over the next 6 months. We're very fortunate to have partners such as the Waikato Regional Council in terms of our government connections and the high-level connections into the various ministries. I highlighted the engagement on various parts of data and analysis. Engagement also includes iwi. We have a specific focus over the next 90 days with regard to Maori economic development and our iwi engagement. All of this is undertaken with a lens of understanding the role sustainability plays in driving our economy, and also how we can collaborate but also cooperate. Sometimes we all have a common goal and we work together to deliver it. Other times we all work together to deliver all of our goals. So that's the approach we're taking. In executing all of these priorities, we facilitate projects and initiatives. That's the role we play in terms of the Waikato economy. We use Te Waka's connections and our individual connections, which are deep in the primary sector, in the way we approach our organisations. We advocate for the Waikato region across multiple audiences and channels, and we are also very vocal in terms of being a great destination for talent, investment, tourism and living. We are also working towards strengthening, generating insights and meaningful data and to inform decision making. So that's just some of the value that we add. And I'll stop there and happy to take questions, which I think there might be one.
Question?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Councillor Letchworth.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll start from flax roots up and how this connects to aquaculture. Is something that we've been promoting as a regional council, where we can see that there's potential areas that we could develop in that space. How would a aquaculture farmer in Kāwhia say connect into this to be able to move forward on some new project that may have happened?
So I think that comes to the connection across through the Tasman Coromandel District Council, but also our work in the sorry, you said Kāwhia, in the blue farming space. So there is, in terms of our strategy, in terms of insights and advocacy, what Te Waka can bring to the table and how we can work with that particular farmer is we may not be on an individual face-to-face with each individual farmer, but how we can support the growth of blue farming is through our insights and connections, not just to central government, but also across agriculture. And the role, so many parts of agriculture, and when I say agriculture, I'm including blue farming as well, is driven by what the sustainable return is. And by sustainable, I mean long-term, and that includes sustainability. So it's how we can support those local level execution projects and activity with wider holistic views and connections into local government. We are a part of the aquaculture seminar and conference that takes place in August. We have had discussions with regard to the short-term role of blue farming and what the infrastructure is needed to scale that up for its long-term play.
I get the big approach, but again, I'm falling short on how that aquaculture farmer in Kāwhia makes a connection to who, to...
Yeah. So in its first instance, ideally, it would be at their local level.
There is no local level.
No local level of what?
well, aquaculture. It's a new development. So we've got
Oh, it's a
there's
new development. Sorry, I
There's
thought
a
it was
new
established.
development that
Yeah.
we're looking to expand on the
Mhm.
West Coast.
Yeah.
There is no identity as such. We've just got
Yeah.
a few consent holders that are given a pretty hard
Yeah.
time due to our resource consenting
Yeah.
systems that really discourage development for expansion.
Yeah.
And they are, of course, in that area haven't got the work set, the skills to be able
Yeah.
to move or expand that
mm.
development.
Yeah.
So how are we actually going to get it at flax loop, roots level to assist to expand through Te Waka?
Yeah. So one, it's picking up the phone and connecting, but two, it's also the
Connecting to who?
connecting. So ourselves, Te Waka, connecting with the local farmer in itself, ideally, or we could connect through. So there is established groups that can help support how they have managed through aquaculture resource consents, etc. What we can look to advocate for positions that may free up some of the constraints to their growth and development. And so that's the type of role we could play. It would be a balance of collaboration, but also cooperation.
Excellent. So I'll get your phone number.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's on our website. I'm sure you've
A
been
lot of
there.
those people out there haven't even got internet.
Yes.
And that's a big thing.
It
that,
is.
As pointed out by Chair Barry.
Yeah.
That connective to be able to get internet into these places would seriously assist in
Yeah.
the regional development, especially those places. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
an issue.
It is a challenge. It's a challenging enabler, access to the internet or any form of Wi-Fi across health, across many things in our very isolated rural communities. Very aware of that and experienced a lot of that during COVID.
Thank you.
Right, we'll move on to Councillor Nippon. Fred, can I get you to turn your?
Thanks. Look, thanks, Fiona. Look, this isn't a loaded question because I don't know the answer myself. I'm just curious. You briefly mentioned sustainability, and if I think climate change is a classic one in front of us at the moment, and we need a whole lot of things to change both at a corporate business level and at a personal behavioural level, and we know that because of bureaucracy and politics, the regulatory frameworks don't always keep pace with this pace of change that we ideally need. Just curious as to how much or how involved Te Waka gets in some of those possibly philosophical type discussions in terms of what industries they support and what they don't. And I emphasise it's not a loaded question. I'm just trying to understand the role and how involved it is practical, how practical it is for you to be involved in those sort of philosophical sort of mindsets when you're getting involved in promoting different businesses and things.
It's a great question, and I'm sure it's a question on everyone's mind. In terms of sustainability, all of us have a responsibility around the promotion of climate competency. So Te Waka's role would be about application of pragmatic advice depending on the particular industry. So whether it be high use freight or whether it be agriculture. The challenge with sustainability is starts have been made. We had the Climate Commission report earlier this year, and whilst a huge amount of investment and change had taken place, it may not have been enough for some industries. The challenge, you're absolutely right, is the way legislation and regulation either keeps up or the intent of it is not necessarily relayed ideally into operating within businesses. So in terms of Te Waka's focus around sustainability, it's intrinsic in everything we do, but it is bespoke climate competency advice where it makes sense. So whether it's sector specific, so something we might be doing around agriculture would be slightly different to what we might be doing in the freight sector or the education sector, those types of things. The behaviour drivers are probably starting to become more and more obvious and for us as a society. So it's very much around what is climate competence for agriculture, different types of agriculture versus what is it in the tech sector and various others.
Seems to make it's an area that both that Te Waka and ourselves should work really closely on
Yeah.
to try and foresee what sort of legislative changes are coming around the corner. Make sure
Yeah.
we don't set our region up to
Yeah.
perform in a less than ideal sort of fashion, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Strange.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Fiona, and welcome.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm pleased to see some diversification within the industries that you are supporting. Yeah, and thank you for the freight and logistics plan. I know that Rosie has worked really hard on that. So yeah, looking forward to see where that leads. My question is, what role do you see Te Waka playing in organisations and industries that support your 4PO, but aren't yet fully established in the Waikato?
I think that for those that are probably in their infancy or growing stage, our role would be to ensure that we connect them with the services and support that are already available. Depending on size, obviously we can channel them to the best partner that works for them. Similarly, if it's a specific area where we have bespoke expertise, we may be able to provide them with some insights and advocacy around how their organisation can thrive.
Thank you. Subsequent question. As you are aware, we propose to fund the Waikato screens. And I know that there's some history there with Te Waka and things not fully going ahead. And more recently, there is some conversations going on. I was just wondering, since you have arrived, where do you sort of see that going, seeing as we were willing to put money in, but there was a few hiccups along the way, the governance factor, the underwriting funding. Seeing as most other regions do have a film office and film screens, I should say, as it does give us a really good regional spread. It's not just the big centres that attract films, they've had a good history of a really good regional spread, which encourages everything of your 4POs. Where do you see Te Waka supporting WRC in trying to find a home for Waikato screens?
So in terms of Waikato screens, it's outside of the scope of what I've prepared for today because it was previous to my coming on board. But I will let Hamish speak to the position that we've arrived at.
It feels like it's been the ball has been passed, Fiona. Angela, as you know, I mean, look, obviously Te Waka in early days supported that initiative, and then it evolved outside of anything that we were looking at. And I think if I look at your question in two parts, obviously we're keen to do everything we can to support anything that Regional Council feels is a priority within the construct of what we have resource and capability to deliver on. And as I understand it, the council has approved support for the Waikato Screens initiative, but with an expectation of, as I understand, that Hamilton Waikato Tourism were going to take on a supporting role for that, and I understand that fell through. And we obviously have conversations with both councillors and the executive around to what extent could Te Waka provide support. I don't think we're not at a point where it's in terms of our priorities, is it at the top of the list in terms of direct resourcing? No. Is it something that makes sense in the region? Absolutely. Any opportunity that has commercial impact makes sense. I think the sticking point came back to the conditionality of the funding and the resourcing. And I think the position that HWT had adopted was one of happy to provide a home for, but not necessarily to be directly accountable for the delivery of that work. And I think that's the position that we've discussed in a similar vein with councillors and with the Regional Council Executive on happy to provide support. I think there's a number of ways that can happen. We've also reached out and had a conversation with Auckland Unlimited around how we could leverage some of the work they're doing to extend it into the Waikato. So there's an opportunity there, but taking on full accountability for the funding and the reporting for that program was something that we felt we didn't actually have the bandwidth to take on directly, but we're happy to try and explore other ways of providing support back with regional council, which is what we've done over the last 2 or 3 months in terms of that ongoing conversation. I don't know whether that addresses hopefully that addresses your question, but happy to.
Yes, it addresses my question, but it's not
Yeah.
obviously the answer I wanted to hear. Yeah, I just wonder with Waikato Screens standing up their own board, like I just wonder if maybe the message hasn't quite got through about what they actually need with support. But I will leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm both through Chrissy and through other councillors. If there's something that's more specific and granular, it hasn't been put to us as a project for Te Waka to own. We've just been approached around how we could support what regional council's doing. So, I think if there's specific things that we can support on within the mix, we're happy to look at those, but we haven't had anything more directly raised.
Thanks for that, Hamish. Tracy, did you?
Yeah, just one comment, councillors, and Councillor Strange, thanks for your questions of a generic nature. Just remind councillors that the specifics of the funding deed with Waikato Screens were discussed at a publicly excluded session of council. So if we get into the details, it's probably something that would need to happen at a publicly excluded session. So if we can keep any questions on that matter at the higher level, as Councillor Strange has done, that would be great.
Thanks for that, Tracy, and thanks, Hamish. Let's see, Councillor White.
Thank you, and thanks very much for coming along today to talk to us, Fiona. I just have a couple of things to raise. One of them is actually to do with Waikato Screen as well. I understand the answer that we've been given, but I must admit I'm also disappointed that it isn't a project that Te Waka is more actively supporting. There is a lot of potential in this project right across the region, and it is something I think that people could really get excited about. So personally, I would like to propose that Te Waka finds a way of providing more direct support. Just wanted to point out that Hamilton Waikato Tourism did write a letter of continued support around the admin and wanting to actually do quite a lot in conjunction with Waikato Screen, and I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. I also think that that one of the difficulties that we have, when you mentioned Auckland Unlimited, Hamish, the difficulty is, the whole point of this was that we wanted to actually have a Waikato-based film office. The minute that you actually go through something like Auckland Unlimited, we're actually passing all of our opportunities to do with film, I believe, to Auckland. And the whole point of this was to actually give us an advantage right throughout the Waikato region. So I do feel that we're kind of missing the opportunities which are here, and maybe we're doing that because we're getting a little bit bound up with some of those difficulties around underwriting. I really feel we have to try and find a way to get to a good place on this. I also just had a specific thing to mention to do with the freight and logistics. And then I just have one more generic question. So just in terms of the freight and logistics plan, I've mentioned recently that we have a lot of problems south of Hamilton. So between Hamilton and Taupo, we've got a lot of problems with major potholes in the road. Now it's really major. Every time I drive that road, I see accidents that nearly happen in front of me with trucks. So I've raised this issue with our chair of the Regional Transport Committee, and he commented that one of the difficulties is that we now have bigger vehicles on the road. That was something that was endorsed way back in when I was first on the Regional Transport Committee back in 2013 to 16. The problem is I can see this problem really, really worsening. So if it is a problem that trucks are creating some of the problems on the road and that they're making these potholes bigger, we either have to actually find a way to address the way that the roads are being maintained, and the resourcing of the materials that are used. We have to get around this problem of safety and also creating resilience on State Highway 1, because the way I see it, we're going to have major problems with accidents, and we're also going to have major problems with the logistics around getting trucks to and from particular places. And the reason that, you know, these bigger trucks were enabled was for the purpose of profit. So I think we really need to have a conversation around that, because the way I see it, things are significantly worse now than they were back in 2013 to 16. So just wanted to mention that. The other thing that I just wanted to talk about in terms of your one-page strategy, the only thing that I have some concerns around is that there are a lot of words in there which are to do with proactively supporting and advocating. So insights and advocacy, lots of things to do with supporting with data and analysis, etc. But I think the thing that I'm concerned about is I can't see any specifics in terms, like you do talk about action, but I can't see. I see a lot of liaison and I see a lot of support and advocacy, but what I really want to know is how we're going to get the benefits on the ground. So you did answer some of that in relation to what Councillor Lichbach said, but I don't have any feeling of confidence yet that that's actually going to result in those actions on the ground. Is there anything that you can share with me that will make me feel like this isn't just going to be a lot of meetings? Because you do talk a lot in there about attending a lot of forums, attending a lot of meetings. How can you demonstrate for me that it's actually going to lead to results on the ground?
So there are some, we can talk to granular actions. So for example, iwi, for our iwi engagement, it talks about proactively support growth in Maori and Pacifica enterprise. We are developing a Maori business directory. We are also working with many Maori business operators to actually help define what is a Maori business, because sometimes that's a challenge in terms of identifying what it is. A goal there is something that can be used nationally. It's not just about our particular region. I did mention a couple of granular activities in workforce development where it's a lot more than just meeting. The Cultivate Trust, we have dedicated, Rosie has spent a lot of time in there for a specific campaign that you will see come out in the next few weeks around attracting tech talent to the region. So that will be a tangible view of actual activity in the marketplace. In terms of outcomes from the freight action plan, that did include rail as well. I hear your comments around the sort of increase in heavy traffic, and that was one of the key call outs, was how do we augment the different types of transport across our resources. We are directly engaging with the Road to Success program, and by engagement it means actually physically sitting down and seeing and developing tools and resources to support truck driver training, because obviously there's significant skill shortage there. In terms of forward looking, so to address the proactive piece, which I can understand why it seems sort of there's something less tangible. We have already set up virtual seminars for Waikato businesses to learn more about the recent changes in the immigration settings, and they're taking place in August specifically. So that's a peppering of some of the activity. There is some other large initiatives that we're working on that we're partnering with other organisations that I look forward to bringing back to the council in the coming months. Does that give some confidence?
Yeah, that's helpful. I just wondered whether Hamish can make an additional comment about Waikato Screen in terms of whether there is what more can you do to actually try to make sure that this is something that happens in the Waikato and that they don't end up just becoming like a little sub-arm of Auckland Unlimited, and a whole lot of work going to Auckland. Thanks.
Yeah, and look, I without going too far down into too much depth, I mean, I think that there seems to be a suggestion that Te Waka kiboshed the initiative, and there's never been any sense of that. In fact, we supported it in the very early days directly. All we have been asked to do is, would we actually take on the governance, the formal governance reporting, and that was done post a decision by HWT not to be in a position to do that. So there's no question here that support in a number of these sectors, including screen, is wonderful. I think the question is one of, is it something Te Waka resources directly? And I don't think there's been any suggestion that we do that. Is it something that Te Waka supports? Generally, we like HWT last year also wrote a letter of support for the industry. So it comes back to being quite granular around what it is that regional council would like us to do. We want to support regional council. We want to support economic development. I think to the second part of your question around boots on the ground, we are 6 people, so our focus is one of working with others to create impact and scale. We can't resource things directly ourselves. So it's not that we're not supportive. More generally, I mean, I think the observation that I would make around funding is that that's a material amount of funding into one sector. That's something it's great that the regional council is willing to support. So if we can support in the background a broader initiative like Waikato Screen, very happy to do that. I think the only question we've been asked is, would we actually be the recipient of the funding and effectively the governor of delivery of the program? And that is for us to take that on, we would need to do a reasonable amount of work to validate the nature of the program and the deliverability of the objectives. So please don't feel that Te Waka is putting a kibosh on what could be a valuable piece of work. It's not something we can resource directly, but we're supportive more broadly. It's a matter of what we've been asked to do. I think, and if there's something that's more granular or specific we can do, very happy to consider that.
Thanks for that, Hamish. I was gonna, thanks for the reminder of how many boots on the ground you do have. I was gonna ask for a reminder for councillors of that, and there's always more endeavors that all of us would love to see Te Waka take, because we see the value of investing in economic development in this region, and we see the value that Te Waka brings in that. And it would be lovely if there were more than 6, because obviously there's lots to do across the region. Councillor Quayle.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The new incoming council is only a few months away, and we have on this plan here the Waikato plan and the wellbeing project in particular. Has Te Waka developed any thinking or advanced their narrative in terms of informing this council and the incoming council around those 2 areas?
Yes, we have, and given Hamish is on the leadership group for the Waikato plan, I will again defer to Hamish. This won't happen next time.
Thanks, Fiona. Look, I think I'll keep my I will keep my comments reasonably limited, Barry. I think as it relates to the wellbeing program, obviously it's a key initiative for regional council. We're very supportive of the broader SDGs and wellbeing across the Waikato, and we're looking at where the work that we do around economic development impacts and overlaps in genuinely driving wellbeing across our communities. And as you know, the wellbeing project is co-located as part of the hub we set up a year ago. So that interaction, that collaboration is absolutely vital. I think it comes to a little bit to the sustainability question earlier on. It's something that's really important to us, but we also have to stay and play within our wheelhouse, which is focused on the economic drivers, and in driving economic success, that also drives to wellbeing. So close relationship, partnership, collaboration, absolutely vital. I've sat on the Waikato plan as the business appointed to the leadership committee now for the last 2.5 years, and obviously there's discussion around where that plan currently sits and its construct and the way it organises. I think my personal view, and I've discussed this with the Te Waka board, we haven't been asked to submit thoughts to regional council. Very happy to do that and consider that if you'd like us to do that. But my personal view and one that I've just socialised a little bit internally is we see the continuation of a regional forum which brings together leaders across social, community, local, central government, business, agencies as being an extremely important function, and particularly in light of moves from Wellington where they're looking to deal regionally, and the extension of that is when we go to regional spatial plans and how that all plays out, let alone local government generally. So the Waikato plan has currency in Wellington, and it is seen by Wellington. I've discussed this with Minister Mahuta and Minister Robertson. The fact that we can come together as a region and talk and present as a region, I think, is important and will become more important. So the continuity of a forum by which those buckets of people communicate is extremely important, and it would be a great shame if that wasn't to be the case. I think the Regional Council has and continues to have
Lost you.
Well, lost you there, Hamish.
It's probably a really good point too.
Do you want to?
Yeah, the most important thing to say.
Fiona, do you
just
want
then.
to just?
where did you lose me, Barry?
About 20 seconds ago. Try it again.
I sorry. So I think the role of Regional Council as a key champion for the Waikato plan or for that organisation is extremely important. Whether that's a champion support leadership role or a subcommittee role, I think is worth debate. But the forum continuing as a forum where the people and leaders from across sectors come together is absolutely crucial. I think the debate that is happening, and I know Dame Margaret is looking at a paper on this at the moment, in terms of the role of the future of the Waikato plan, and I think that's for a number of people to share opinions on. I think that the debate is around, is that simply a forum where leadership connects, or is it a forum where there's work that is done and delivered from the forum in itself? And my personal view on that is that I think the strength of that forum and the strength of that voice, and it must also have iwi at the table in an absolute partnership way, is vital. I think there's a lot of organisations that can do the doing, and my personal view is that the continuation of that as a forum and a connector is vital. That it picks up and shows support for and champions key projects. I think personally, the separation of some of the execution stuff could be left to the partners that are sitting around that table rather than duplication, but that's a personal view.
Thanks for that, Hamish.
Thanks for that, Hamish. Tracy, did you want to make a comment?
Just so councillors are aware, Madam Chair, there have been a number of workshops with the Waikato Plan Leadership Committee on the future of what the Waikato Plan may be, being that years ago we didn't have the Wellbeing Project, we did have Te Waka, there's now a regional leadership group. It's a crowded space, we realise this. So there is a paper that will be coming through from the Waikato Plan Leadership Committee in August through to Council, and then there will be a staff recommendation on the basis of that will feed into the creation of the committees for the new triennium for the new Council to consider. So we thought it was important, given that the leadership group, from my perspective, have been the most active and the most successful in the last 2.5 years to canvass their opinion. So that will come through the committee process.
Thanks for that, Tracy. Councillor Nicol.
Thank you. And yes, I've very much enjoyed being a part of the Waikato plan as well. Thank you, Hamish and Fiona. Really enjoyed our recent workshop, and getting to know you now, Fiona, in person was great. And really wanted to support, the po around connections and partnerships. It's just one of those things that now, with more resourcing, and it really allows you to cement that value, because there's a lot of adversity ahead, and without the relationships, really hard to deliver. So thank you also for working with the Wellbeing Project and the Waikato Plan, and Karen Bennett from the Regional Council, knowing that all of these things tying together. I found it really interesting. You mentioned before, Fiona, about climate competence. My question to you is how you develop that within Te Waka, and any future plans to develop that further as well.
Sure. So climate competency is something that a lot of organisations and business commerce as a transaction is grappling with how they intertwine climate competency, and so our role has to be to provide appropriate insight for the sector. It's not a solving role, you know. We're not a CRI that can come up with the new cow butcher or the like, but it is to be across what is out there to help navigate through overwhelming options, and also to help support businesses structure their growth to include climate competency. Now, it sounds like another buzz phrase, but it is quite bespoke to the particular area. So, for example, I saw that you went to see the e-tanker with Fonterra recently. That's an example of one element for advanced manufacturing, one single element. There's multiple elements we have to consider. And it's also about ensuring that there is a baseline across all industry. We are very, very focused on the agricultural sector, tech and various other areas where there are limited resources of inputs is an area where climate competency doesn't tend to be as well planned. There tends to be short-term behavioural sort of actions, not long-term sustainable value add positions on climate. So that's the role that we will play. It's a layered, it's not a one size fits all.
No, I totally agree with you. I'm very supportive of it. And I mean, one place I'm going in the future is with all of those possible avenues that you can take. We obviously don't want to get too carbon focused,
Correct.
and sometimes even methane focused.
Yeah.
There's the whole ecological overshoot issue, which is why we talk about biodiversity a whole lot, but really it is about clean water, air, soil, that stuff. And so the more holistic, that not just climate competence, but like a whole competence in that area would be really appreciated. Because the greenwash is rough, and I'm mindful that as a regional economic development agency, you'll be quite close with a whole lot of industry and business who are still figuring it out themselves or know better, but are trying to get away with, say, the minimum requirement. And ultimately, we're stuck in this place where we know and we're told we need to go through an economic transformation.
Yeah.
As in like now.
Yeah.
And based on now being like really, really hard, maybe very soon, you can either do that with policy and regulation and banning things, or you can do that with leaders, industry, investing, and so forth. So I guess, yeah, for me, a huge part is our regional economic development agency knowing that investment in the environment in our community brings about economic well-being, as opposed to the old paradigm that has so been proven to put us in this situation, which is to invest in economy as a thing of its own, to then one day maybe give us the environmental and social good, which just hasn't eventuated. So I just really appreciate your work so far, and I'm put a lot of trust in that it's going to go much further, whether here or not next time we get to meet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Online, we've got a question from Tippa. Councillor Mahuta? Oh, she lowered her hand, maybe. Didn't have a. Oh, did you? Last chance, Tippa. Going once. All right. Perhaps, Councillor Mahuta, if you wanted to just email. Oh, is there a hand up again? Is that Tippa?
Kia ora, sorry, just trouble unblocking the mic. Kia ora tātou. Probably they're not questions, they're more in support of the work you do. Tēnā koutou. So again, really keen to see the success of the Māori and Pacifica strategy, and note that Amotai has had huge success in creating quite an extensive network. So just want to make sure that whatever we do isn't too bespoke, that it's because we want to, that it can't join up to other databases that are being developed in this triangle of ours. Amotai, again, has already registered thousands of businesses in our area as well. So just don't want double handling and compatible databases. So don't go too bespoke. And then probably the other give is that we have an app called Kawe Kōrero and would really like to see Te Waka using it, because again, we all know this, doing business with any group, that any other ethnicity, it's important. Pronunciation is important. So the days of saying Maori are gone. And the days of saying, just all of those things. So just, again, Kawe Kōrero is free. It's a council app. It tells you who we are in this little here and how to interact. So again, that's a give. So kia kaha tātou, kia ora.
Kia ora, Tepa and Tēnā koe. Hey, look, just so we are working with Ari Ana in the background on our relationship with Amatai. So this is not trying to recreate wheels where there's already significant work happening already. So we are connecting on that front, just so you know. Kia ora.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for that. That's the nice, got in there quick, Barry.
We've got a second over here as well.
All right, we've got a motion to receive the report and to endorse the strategy on a page, moved by
Happy to
Councillor
second
Quayle.
it. Okay,
And I think we had a second,
cool.
Councillor Strange, and all those in favor?
All right.
Opposed? Oh, did you want that recorded? So we've got division recorded, Councillor White voting against that. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Fiona. Thank you very much, Hamish. Appreciate the time and the effort that you've made to be with us today, and great to see you in person, Fiona, and
Thank you.
and looking forward to the next steps for Te Waka and regional council in person.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you
Kia
for
ora,
joining
ka
us.
kite.
All right. Everyone. Okay, so now we are on to item 6. This is on page 25. This is the WRC submission on the national policy statement for biodiversity exposure draft. Tracy.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. For those folk who have been around this table for a little while, this is about the 3rd or 4th kick at an MPS on Indigenous biodiversity from the government. Patrick has worked pretty closely on the team, the national team, and getting this some traction and some momentum over the last couple of years. I guess our submission indicates to you we don't think it's quite 100% right at the moment and could do with a bit more work. One thing that we have been pretty vocal on when talking with central government is the connectivity of freshwater biodiversity in our climate response. We have, however, separate national policy statements for each, which don't necessarily talk or tap into the other. So hopefully with the impending RM reforms and the ability to have a national planning framework, some of those inconsistencies will be addressed. In terms of Indigenous biodiversity, it is probably, I've said it many times, but I will just reiterate it, it is probably the most contentious matter other than natural hazards management that we as a regional council participate in. It is definitely a key issue for our territorial authorities. So from my perspective, having national policy direction that clarifies roles and responsibilities, both day-to-day roles and responsibilities, and provides a strategic framework and some clarity is really important. We as a sector, regional council and territorial authority sector, have been looking for this for some time. It is a comprehensive submission, Madam Chair. It is a very technical topic, and we've got Hannah and Miffy here to present, who will be assisted by Patrick. So over to you, Hannah.
Oh, is that on here? Perfect. Do you want to put the slides up?
Yeah, just bring that a little bit closer there. Yeah. Thank you.
Is that better? Perfect. Morena koutou, my name's Hannah Craven. Thank you for your time this morning. I will briefly summarise the draft and the draft submission, if that's useful. So as Tracy mentioned, MFE has been consulting on an exposure draft for the MPSIB following consultation on a proposed draft back in 2019. They've made it quite clear that the intent of this consultation is to test workability of the provisions and understand the implications of their implementation in practice rather than test the direction of the policy itself. So we have had to keep this in mind while drafting the submission. The intent and direction of the exposure draft has not changed much from the initial consultation, but there were some key changes, including provisions for Māori land and geothermal areas, and some tweaks to the provisions for significant natural area identification and assessment. So the NPSIB will impose a number of new requirements on regional councils, some of which we anticipated under the recent long-term plan biodiversity business case. And therefore, we are partially resourced to meet these responsibilities, but we were not prepared for specific requirements, particularly the identification and mapping of highly mobile fauna. Just pop to the next slide, please. We will have better clarity on the scope of these requirements and our ability to meet these, as well as the extent of supporting measures from central government after the final gazettal of the NPSIB. Next slide, please. Because the consultation is about workability, the submission goes really into detail, as Tracy said, and it provides clause by clause commentary and is quite technical in places in terms of interpretation and implementation. Staff have had conversations with other councils, including other regional councils and territorial authorities, to make efforts to align submissions where possible. And the draft submission also tries to reinforce the submissions made by Taituara and the regional sector group. Particular points where we align on these relate to the need for capacity and resourcing support for ecologists, council and iwi, as well as funding and national guidance. The need for strong transitional provisions for SNAs while these are being assessed and identified, and the need for consistency with other national direction, particularly freshwater legislation, as well as considering the upcoming resource management reform. A big key point of our submission is recommending alternative approaches to SNA assessment, which the NPSIB directs as the responsibility of territorial authorities, supported by regional councils where requested. Staff have considered that this not only is the where requested wording unclear, but points out that WRC already provides support to its local authorities for SNA identification, that this is used variably across the region and does not result in consistent SNA protection. The submission recommends that where agreed by authorities within a region, regional councils are better placed to undertake the work of SNA assessment at a regional level, with support from local authorities at a property level. Other key focus areas of the submission include advocating for our approach to geothermal protection, querying the process for identifying highly mobile fauna, and requesting national guidance for monitoring regional biodiversity strategies and calculating vegetation cover. Overall, the draft aligns with the policy direction in the RPS, recognising that a collaborative approach is needed for successful biodiversity management, which the submission recognises. More than happy to answer any questions or incorporate any further feedback into the submission. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Anna. Councillor Redford.
Yeah, I support what the intent of this is, but just need to identify what is considered highly mobile fauna. Can you provide that?
Yes, so the submission does make a decent point on it's a bit unclear what the process was for identifying highly mobile fauna, and so we've requested further information on what the process for doing this is, and further guidance on how regional councils should be mapping this and identifying these as well.
Again, I support that it should be done. You know, I'm just thinking of what is, identifying what is highly mobile. Again, looking at coastal marine areas, sea level rise and migrating areas, that require, allow for natural migration through climate change, whether that is something that is highly mobile.
Yes, definitely. Yes. I think we do make a point in the submission about climate change and migratory species due to that. So I think that that's covered in the section we talk about the climate change.
And one other thing which is related, but SNAs and the unintended consequences, where there is, because of landowners that are putting in a lot of native plantings, and I guess I'm one of those, is then being hamstrung by having an SNA applied over their property by a third party, which is a real disincentive to many people now, as those restraints do not allow them to develop their plan because somebody said, no, you've done all this great work, you don't own it. Well, not in so many words, you still pay rates for it, but you can't do what you want to do with it. And I think that needs to be worked through in a better way than it is currently.
Right. Through you, Madam Chair, I think we would probably have picked that up in our comments on the transitional provisions for SNA, but it's something, if we haven't identified, we can highlight. We can use words, I think, Hannah and Miffy, that we used in previous submissions to the MPS freshwater regs around the creation of habitats, doing the right thing, and just how we recognise those for the values they're creating, but also recognise that they are created habitats. It's an area of significant tension.
Yeah, it's private land. I guess all of these significant natural areas are basically being mapped on private land, and if I think you've got it. It has those can have negative consequences in that it's slowing processes down. Thank you.
Councillor Nebon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just sort of, thanks, Hannah. Yes, look, I think it's a good submission. Just on that one that Fred just mentioned, it's interesting. We still, as a country, seem a bit obsessed with the concept of what private ownership means in reality, which is blooming frustrating in these processes. And we went through the discussion with freshwater, but we still put on this one as well. I guess I'm just curious on your guys' response, and Patrick, maybe it might be more of a question for you. It feels like this is more of a focus on mapping and identifying SNAs rather than managing SNAs, if that makes sense. Is that what's intended? Because obviously the managing an SNA, i.e. pest control, etc., is quite a significant cost, which is quite connected to the whole concept of predator-free New Zealand, which is bigger than Ben-Hur. And is it anticipated that at some point in the future there'll be more of a focus on managing those areas rather than just identifying them and mapping them?
Yeah, I think that's what the regional biodiversity strategies will be for, but also there is still the requirement through, district planning for provisions for SNAs. So the existing provisions in district plans won't go away. They'll just be potentially clearer identification of the SNAs that will then be affected by those provisions.
Yeah.
First thought.
I gotta get a mic. Yeah, that's why the chair has wheels.
That's awesome. I think so. Around the pest management side of it, I mean, the NPSIB is trying to put a line in the sand and say no further decline as well. So, so there'll be a point at which there's an interplay with other legislation, especially the Biosecurity Act, regional pest management plans. I'd say the regional and national biodiversity strategies try and tie all of that together. There is I guess there's a point at which they're silent on it.
Yeah, because I mean, it's quite connected to the bits around resilience to climate change as well, obviously, because we know there's sequestration benefits. If we could even just do basic pest control on vegetation in the country.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And look, to Fred's point about what you can and can't do with an SNA on your land, I think focus needs to be on enabling activities that don't have a detrimental effect on the values of those SNAs. Because I think sometimes a lot of plan roles get a bit obsessed with making applicants jump through hoops to do certain things that aren't necessarily connected to the impacts of those activities, you know. And you see that classic case where people want to just put a simple house site or some sort of accommodation or something, and it's really, in the overall scheme of things, can have stuff all different. That can often help generate a bit of income for pest control and things like that.
I'll let Tracy comment before you- Other points you
And yeah, just speaking, through you, Madam Chair, to the point made around mapping and identifying SNAs rather than managing. I mean, we have, as Hannah said in our introduction, made significant investment in assisting many of our TAs with the mapping of significant natural areas. I guess there has been a change in understanding over the 20 years that the RMA came in, that it's fine to identify these isolated pockets, but actually the ecosystem doesn't work in isolated pockets. It is about habitat corridors and how these things connect up. I just wanted to remind councillors that we did endorse biodiversity and biosecurity business case through the LTP. We deferred it to begin year 2, which was strange enough this month. Patrick and Lizette and Michelle Begbie are leading that through the organisation, and the first step is to start getting, well, to build on the fantastic relationships we've already got, the information we've got, and to just see with the MPS coming through and the requirement for that regional biodiversity strategy, how far away we are, what the gap analysis is, and then to crack on and get it done. So that was a great benefit of having Patrick on the working group for the MPS Indigenous Biodiversity, and a lot of the work that council's invested in the last couple of LTPs.
Yeah.
I think it puts us in a better place than many other regional councils who haven't looked to take that strategic approach and integrate it across their organisations.
Yeah. I mean, just as an aside, but sort of connected, if I look at Waipa District Council and the amount of subdivision that's happening where I live, permitted or enabled by landowners fencing off little bits of remnant and things like that, and in effect almost creating as well. To me, there's some rationalisation needed there as well, because it's almost been looked upon by the landowners as just a pathway to create more subdivision, to create more income. But I don't actually think it's doing stuff all for biodiversity. In fact, and I think of the pest control obligations that it's putting on us into the future, I'm not convinced it'll be well looked after. And if I also look at what our policies and plans are doing in terms of retiring a lot of those areas that shouldn't have livestock on them anyway, it's kind of a double up. That makes sense.
And this where I think the strength of a regional biodiversity strategy will come through. When I started planning, they were called scrubby corners.
Yeah.
So if you had a bit of bracken or a Cody tree that you'd planted that was a metre high, you could get a compensation lot, effectively an environmental compensation lot. That evolved into transferable development rights. So you could actually transfer the right to somebody else, and if they had a property on something better than a scrubby corner, because we started to understand these areas, they could subdivide. I think what the regional biodiversity strategy will do is actually identify, you know, the areas that are of the most importance, those that as a result of climate change and just attrition over time will be the next most important, and then have a more strategic and tactical approach rather than people capitalising on areas that may not be of worth.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And look, the last one was the requirement for cities and towns, whatever you want to, having 10% of their area. Who defines the boundary of the town next to that 10%? Because it seems to me like in Hamilton it's probably relatively achievable with all our gully systems, but going to chair before Wahia or Huntley, or even Cambridge for that matter, I'm not sure it's that straightforward, and I'm not so sure that that's the sort of thing we should be incentivizing. It seems like a bit of an idealistic target rather than a target that will have meaningful outputs in terms of biodiversity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, complete agree that it sounds very idealistic, but we did raise in the submission that there's been no guidance as to what kind of scale that should be applied at, and yeah, how regional councils should be measuring those areas. So yeah, we've asked for more.
So I noted that, but I just wondered whether a couple of comments around questioning the effectiveness of such an approach, maybe providing some alternatives. I don't know, but it seems to me that it's getting some better clarification is one thing, but it might not necessarily result in a more effective deliverable, if that makes sense.
Definitely can add that in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are you wanting us to, do you think we should strengthen the wording a bit?
Yeah, because it's one thing to seek clarification and say, yeah, well, this is where it should be, but is it really worth some of those small urban townships pumping a whole bunch of money into creating biodiversity when in actual fact it's probably being created through a whole host of other drivers anyway, and it's not worth it, you know. I mean, it's the whole concept of requiring a Morrinsville dairy farm that's water pasture having 10% of its farm biodiversity is kind of illogical when there's farms in the country that have got 25% in permanent native. You know?
Team, just a question. In terms of that 10%, is that something where we are anticipated to provide guidance through the regional biodiversity strategy or not? I'm not sure. You know, I'm just wondering, with speaking to the question about how do you apply it to a Tukarua versus Kairoa, is that something we provide guidance on, or is it silent?
It seems silent as far as I'm aware.
Councillor Tagg. Dennis?
Yes, thanks. A very good submission. I support the provision, and it makes a lot of sense to me that regional councils take over the identification of SNAs, given that we really have the expertise in that area. And in fact, from my experience, some TAs have actually almost tried to undermine the whole process. And I think the other reason is that regional council is a little more removed politically and from the contentious aspect of this than at a TA level. And then the other synergy I'd bring to attention is that it's actually only regional councils that can remove existing use rights. And I wouldn't put this on a par with that, but it's in the same sort of sphere where you are to some degree affecting people's individual property rights. And so it sort of makes sense to me that synergy be continued into this area. So I just express my support for that part of the submission. Thanks.
Councillor White?
Yeah, thank you. Look, like Councillor Litchbark, I also support the intent of the submission, and I actually think it's a pretty good submission. I just have a few things that I wanted to mention. One is that I think we should strengthen the emphasis of the difficulty that we have around SNAs and the issue of private land and basically taking control over what can happen on private land. I think it is really important that we provide incentives rather than disincentives. I think the problem with disincentives is people often get angry and take things into their own hands if they feel that people are taking control, trying to take control over their land. So I think those are some unintended consequences which can have quite major effects in terms of the actual outcome. So yes, I would like to strengthen that part of it. I also just wanted to say I actually agree with this thing about property developers and subdivisions, and I wonder what else we can actually include in the submission in terms of mitigations. I'm just conscious of the fact that a lot of, for instance, subdivision development in the Kinloch area in Taupo, that quite a lot of the time they've wanted to reduce they've wanted to reduce the amount of vegetation which is included in their property subdivision, and they've applied for that, and often they've got that, and that really bothers me that it's so easy for people to actually apply for consents to do that and get permission for that. So I don't know what we can actually do around that, what we could say, but it would be useful to think about that. Maybe Tracy can come up with something. The other thing I just wanted to say about where we've said that we support additional funding for iwi, can you give me a little bit more information about what you mean about that? And my only reason for that is, I mean, I understand sort of multiple owned Māori land and undeveloped land, etc., and that, you know, there's a lot of benefit in that land. The only thing I don't understand is at the moment there are other things like the Ngā Whenua Rahui Fund, which is a contestable ministerial fund that actually exists to facilitate the voluntary protection of Indigenous biodiversity on Māori owned land. So I guess I just want to know, I don't want us to encourage duplication. I do want to encourage resources going to things that will help us get to the outcomes that we want. But I know that we'll also be criticised for advocating for something that's not consistent in terms of financial assistance. So for instance, somebody who has put a lot of money into an SNA, you know, well, into developing biodiversity on their land, it then gets declared as an SNA and the financial assistance may not be there. So I'd just like to understand a little better what it is that we're asking for in terms of additional resourcing of iwi.
I think it was just a more of a general comment that iwi are under-resourced to take on all of these extra, requirements that the NPSIB is setting out, much like councils and ecologists, everybody's a bit under-resourced and stretched. So it was more of a general comment rather than specific. We think that specific funding should be directed towards any one of those provisions.
So have we considered what funding is already made available, like the Ngā Whenua Rahui Fund? So have we commented on that?
Yeah, look, I can make a comment. So we do have the Ngā Whenua Rahui Fund, which is for all intents and purposes equivalent to the QE2 Covenant Fund. I think why Māori land is disadvantaged is that a lot of the land has not been able to be developed in the way that general title European land has been able to be developed. So there is an increased incidence of some of the significant Indigenous biodiversity land on some of the multiply owned Māori land. Now, because that land is multiply owned and there are encumbrances on raising finance on that land, some of the funds that are available to general title land are not available to iwi to use. And I'm speaking of my experience when I worked at the Opotiki District Council. So it is quite a challenge for multiply owned Māori land to seek other than Ngā Whenua Rahui. And there are I guess a buffet of opportunities out there, but because it is multiply owned Māori land, it is in fact disadvantaged. So I like what you disadvantaged from applying for some of these funds. So I like what you said in terms of consistency of financial assistance. That's exactly what we're seeking, irrespective of land tenure, that everybody has equal access to the funds, be whatever fund they are from. As Hannah said, the NPS ascribes additional responsibilities to ourselves, to territorial authorities and to iwi without any resourcing accompanying it. So if we're going to make the difference, it needs to be very much an equitable playing field.
Okay, so can we just make that clear?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
I don't write down when I'm speaking, so yes, what Tracy said.
Check the recording. Yeah. We've got Councillor Mahuta online.
Kia ora, carrying on probably in a similar vein, Tracy. I think where we use iwi interchangeably with Māori landowners, it causes that problem. A lot of people read iwi and they read settlement. That does not necessarily relate to the land ownership question. So just ask for more specificity in the terms used, so that people don't get confused, because not all iwi are landowners. So again, too many terms to use too differently can cause confusion and just having listened to the last debate, that I think that's what Councillor White has highlighted. In saying that, our submission still green gates Māori whenua, in my opinion, in terms of where these people that are going to hold on to the biodiversity for the rest of the nation, ake amini. For those who don't understand the analogy I'm using, it's just like saying the Amazon should stay rainforest, but how do those poor people continue a lifestyle? So I would like more said in the economic disadvantages faced by Māori landowners if our land's all green gated by SNAs. Yes, there are funds available, I agree with Councillor White, but that's again for more green gating of our whenua, which means that we don't have the same development and future opportunities for economic well-being of our constituent, whether they be iwi members, Māori landowners, and or hapu or whānau interests. So not unlike what we said in PC1, Tracy, around that, around the negative impacts that forcing the same rule on Māori land ownership would cause. So again, if I'm not saying we need to change it, but we need to not use all those terms interchangeably because it confuses the audience. Kapo?
Thanks for that.
I support Tipper on that matter, those matters she's raised there. I think it's quite important we raise the issues and we make those clear. So thank you for those comments, Tipper. I generally applaud the proposed submission and the recommendations. I think they are pragmatic and assisting to achieve solutions, and that's what we're all about. The key message to me that I picked up was consistency is very important. I agree with the SNA identification assessment tools by the Regional Council. I think it's absolutely appropriate, and I can't think of any other group who's better equipped to do that. So I think that's very important we push that. Vegetation clearance, again, I support that's being raised in that submission. And I support Councillor Kneebone in terms of the clarification of the unintended consequences which can happen when you make a rule, that you have to look at how it impacts the wider communities, wherever they are. And I think, people write it with well-intended messages, but then it can get interpreted in very fixed and hard ways. So I think, a very good point, Councillor Kneebone. Support that. So overall, support it. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Quayle. Councillor Nichol.
Thank you. And yeah, it certainly was a big submission. We had to wade through all of the, clarify this, and please don't use as practicable. Yeah, thank you. Having gone through a lot of submissions now, I get why. And but the key points that I really like about the submission, highlighting the capacity constraints, since none of the work's actually going to happen without, you can't fund it on hopes and dreams. The Regional Council undertaking SNA assessments as per Councillor Teague's comments, totally agree with that. Having up-to-date climate information, because it does update itself pretty quickly, and relevant legislation that's referenced, the interconnectedness, especially with the RMA reform, obviously, with the regional spatial strategy, it's going to be so important that it all fits together when it's all finally worked out. Always a fan of nationwide consistent approaches for identifying SNAs. It's just a sense of fairness up and down the country. And that whole clarifying where offsetting or even compensating isn't an option. I think we only said offsetting, and I'm still getting my head around the difference between the two, but obviously we're at a state of our environment where where offsetting has been shown. We've said in a different submission before, offsetting is not that effective because it's so difficult to recreate the complexity and beauty and everything else of one environment in another place with little, seedlings that you got for $2.50. And we were talking before about the 10% number in a district, I think it was. I think we could go further to say, well, pick a number, but over a bigger area, and let us work it out. I don't know how others feel about that, but I mean, I'd be more comfortable with just picking a number out of the sky, but the one the UN uses a lot is 30%, say in a nation, and then working out where that is appropriate rather than having this issue of Hamilton City being completely tiny and lots of, population versus vast district areas that are just grass and trees and everything. So I just think if you set a number, and if you're going to use a number, the larger you go with the area that it applies to, the more sensible it's likely to come out. But that's just my opinion. I did have 2 questions, and they were, how on earth was the ecosystem services thing omitted from the objective? I mean, that just seems crazy, and you might not be able to answer it, but thank you for putting it in. I mean, it just seems like biodiversity provides ecosystem services. We know about this. Is there a reason or something that you can give me of, nope, question mark just like over my head?
Through the chair, we're a bit baffled as well.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wondered. Sometimes you have insights. And the last question then was, oh yeah, have I just never understood the precautionary approach properly? Because it seems to me, because we're saying here, it's difficult to apply the precautionary approach for species we know little about. But to me, it seems if we know little about them, we'd just be more precautionary and prevent the activity. But it sounds to me like that's not how it happens in practice. Just something I'd love to understand.
I'll take a swing at it.
Thanks.
And
So no,
somebody else.
coastal plan, we talked about it as well.
Yeah, look, the precautionary approach is an approach that is deep in legislation and has legal definition. What the challenge becomes is you can attach a precautionary approach where you don't have all the information, where you don't have any information. It becomes a little bit redundant because, and what we're saying here is it's very hard to attach a precautionary approach when we only know, say, 1% of a full picture. It becomes more relevant when we say we know 47% or 53%, because if we start writing rules about Indigenous biodiversity where perhaps we don't have 90% of the information, the veracity of those rules and the relevance and the integrity of the rules and the authority writing the rules is called into question. So for me, precautionary approach, when you have some of the information and you can make a qualified, I would say, guesstimate and policy framework around it, where you just don't know, it's a bit more difficult to apply it.
I can see how development of an area can take precedence in the absence of information.
Just one more comment to your matter you raised, Councillor Nicol, around picking a number and applying it nationally.
Or regionally.
Or
like
regionally.
Bigger than
that has been argued long and hard in many national policy statements. If I go back to the issue I gave when I worked in the East Coast, there's an overrepresentation of Indigenous vegetation there that hasn't been cleared. If we go to the Kaingaroa Plains just east of Taupo, there is no Indigenous vegetation. So
that's right.
You become penalised, such as we are with our dairy industry and the targets that we have to meet in the Waikato, because it's a historical legacy. So that equity and that consistency of approach starts to be challenged nationally. It seems like a better way of doing it, but as soon as you sit down and go, okay, how are we going to implement this? Okay, you've got the areas that have the least rating base to be able to implement effectively carrying the most significant change. And for us, it's the other way around with, if I parallel it to the NPSFM, we have to make more of a change than those others because of the fact that we have increased incidence of that land use activity. So it's a bit of a lottery, to be fair. But I understand what you're saying, which is inequity of approach.
Yeah, more of a, what's the overall objective? Let's not get tied up in a 10% of every district.
Yeah.
But the overall objective is for New Zealand to have sufficient areas set aside for nature as opposed to humans and their activities. That's all. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, I do want to wrap this up. Oh no, I've got Councillor Woodpark and then Councillor Kneebone. If we can just be quick in our comments.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as Barry pointed out and others, you know, consistency is really important. Green gating, as Tipper pointed out, you know, green gating and lacking of opportunity, where you've got Maori landowners that are most definitely, you know, haven't had the same opportunity. But moving forward, this green gating, you know, again applying to my situation, seriously impacts my ability or my whānau, my family, to actually use my land now as a result. So it's not just Maori land that is disadvantaged. And unfortunately, my bank balance doesn't allow me to do any more than probably a lot of others as well. So it's consistency and equal approach to this across the board, I think, needs to be applied. When it comes to what you were just talking about now, you know, it's kind of like a carbon footprint, a biodiversity footprint. And I think that can be calculated in the same manner as a carbon footprint, and that percentage should be worked out per size of development and offset by what it's being displaced. And that, again, I think should be done, and that would be consistent rather than looking at, a podiki and all the bush that surrounds it and thinking that you're okay. It's the developer and what's being developed. And that's it. Thank you.
Councillor Kneebone.
Yeah, I think Fred would need to be a little bit realistic here, and look, Tipper mentioned healthy rivers. I'm not convinced that's a comparable scenario to look at, because at the end of the day, if you think of an SNA, and the classic case was the one that was in the media up north, the Northerny, we were a bit concerned, but wasn't a bit concerned because obviously they wanted to put a bit of individual housing, not towns, but individual houses in amongst some of those areas that have been classified as SNA. And you do have to ask, was that really going to have a significantly detrimental effect on the integrity of those areas from a significant biodiversity perspective? And I think the answer was probably no, but the way the legislation was written, it was going to make it really challenging for them to do that, because the reality is we're not going to, and I'm sure iwi have no interest in putting the bulldozer through acres and acres of significant biodiversity, but that's quite different to wanting to put little individual houses or whatever the case may be. And I do think we need to make sure that the legislation is written in such a way that we can do a fair analysis on what the impact's going to be, you know. Yeah, and look, I think, Fred, we do have to accept that there is a lot of history there that the opportunities aren't the same, because yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Tracy, do you want to summarize? Because there are some, we have arrived at some changes and some editing. So just to summarize for the committee so that we can do the delegations.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I haven't captured everything where councillors noted that they supported the submission, because that means we don't have to do any more work on those bits. But for me, I guess the matters that we will go back and have a look at, and I see we've got the resolution up there that myself and the chair will make sure that the submission is amended. So around just making sure that we've captured the highly mobile fauna matter, that is one that is a little bit mysterious, but be very clear there. The SNAs and the unintended consequences of restoration and mitigation, doing the right thing and not being penalised, supposedly penalised at a later date, and creating disincentives for restoration activity. Councillor Nebo mentioned it at the start and just came back again to it then around managing SNAs. So enabling activities within SNAs in such a way that can enable their use but not affect the actual qualities of the SNA themselves. Have a look at the 10%, strengthen our wording around there so we can make it practical, I guess, aspirational but practical. And how do we determine that? Incentivising creation of SNAs, as Councillor White was talking about, but acknowledging that there are private land use issues, but there also needs to be consistency of financial assistance, irrespective of land tenure, but also consistency and equity in the ability to make livelihood and investment off the land. So that applies both ways to general title land, Māori-owned land or multiple land. Going back and having a look at our terminology, I think is key, as Councillor Mahuta highlighted. Landowners, Māori landowners might be different to hapu and iwi. Getting clarification of the unintended consequences when making rules. Councillor Coyle, I think that's a really good point, which comes back again to points that Councillor Chwaka and Councillor Nebo were making in their concluding comments. Really having focus on capacity constraints that Councillor Nicol raised, the compensation and offsetting, just making sure we've got that right, or the MPS has that right, and really trying to understand clearer the overall objective of the percentage, but where is the best place to determine how that percentage can be met.
Great, thank you for that summary. So we've got the motion that the report is received and the delegation previously done based on the summary that Tracy has moved by Councillor Newbone, seconded by Councillor Quayle. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, well done, everybody. Thank you, the staff, for your thorough report, but also the way you presented it today. I thought it was really useful. So thank you for that. All right, team, we are going to take a break now. It is 11:09. So we shall reconvene at 11.
We'll go 14 minutes. No,
20.
15.
Yeah, 11:20. We're always optimistic.
Yeah.